Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and we have something really cool to take a look at today, something that apparently the United States Postal Service was trying to keep for themselves because this has just been like sitting in New Jersey for weeks, like it just absolutely was not going anywhere, and I have no idea why. But we have the Haolonggood Nasutoceratops, and this is something that I was really excited about, just in general excited to see Haolonggood back at it when it comes to releasing models, but also just because, again, it's a Nasutoceratops. We don't have too many of them, and this one looks phenomenal. It really does. But you can see as far as the box art goes, both versions are here. We have both variants to take a look at, and both of the boxes are exactly the same as far as what we see here on the front. No differences at all. Pretty much exactly the same thing if you turn it around and take a look at the back. And then, again, just basically Haolonggood on the side. This side here doesn't have anything, so it's that side there that has Haolonggood. But if you look up here at the top of the box, you can basically see the other releases that Haolonggood has out currently, which two of them are the Tyrannosaurus. We have two versions of the Therizinosaurus, two versions of the Carcharodontosaurus, two versions of the Dicraeosaurus, and then one version of the Quetzalcoatlus. Interestingly enough, though, there's actually three versions of the T-Rex that we don't see one of the versions here. And conveniently, it's the version that I did actually acquire, which I think was the best version. Although I do really actually want to get a hold of both of those versions of the T-Rex as well, because they look really cool. And the other version of the Therizinosaurus that I didn't acquire, I would like to get a hold of that one as well. But really psyched to take a look at these, so let's pop them out of the box and do just that. So here are our Nasutoceratops, and wow! Those are absolutely beautiful. Like, if you go back to, well, actually, I would say the last two releases, the Therizinosaurus and T-Rex, were really good. But if you go back, and just look at the history of the Haolonggood line and see how they've evolved up until this point, like, it's really impressive. And the sculpts have always been awesome, but I'm really blown away by how good the paintwork is on these newest releases, the Nasutoceratops, and specifically this one. That paint job is incredible, and this is the one that I was most hyped for, even though I do love the colors of that version, the bluish version. I was more hyped for this one just because I really like the coloration, the color scheme they've gone with, and it's insane looking at that here in person and seeing just how good that is. Like, that looks like the type of paint job you would get from a very expensive paleo artist to paint it. Like, that is super impressive as far as the paintwork goes. And that's, not to kind of downplay this one, because this one as well looks great. Like, they really did a good job as far as choosing the tones of color, all nice and naturally applied. So I'm absolutely blown away by these two. Honestly, two of the best figures that I think I've ever seen, especially when it comes to a Ceratopsian. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump straight to a closer look at these right now. So we'll begin with the version that I think is my favorite here, and sculpt-wise, both figures are the same, so we'll only need to really go over the sculpt once. It's the paint jobs that would be different, of course. But as far as the Nasutoceratops goes, if you look here in the face, the skin texture is super nicely done, and in fact, you can see, if you look even leading down here to the lower jaw, just how vibrant that scale detail is. It is absolutely incredible looking. And on top of that, the paintwork is out of this world. There's so much variation of color here in the face of the Nasutoceratops. It is honestly mind-blowing that this figure is this beautifully painted and sculpted for the price ranges. They're like $20 or so for these figures. It is incredible looking paintwork for something like this. And you can see again, I'm not even going to attempt to begin picking out all the different tones of color we see here in the face. There is just tons of it, and it is all extremely nice and naturally applied. About as realistic and naturally applied as it gets, and probably as natural looking as it would be on an actual real living Nasutoceratops. The beak as well is extremely well done when it comes to a sculpting standpoint. You can see the detail looks fantastic on it, and there is a lot of it. There is just tons and tons of detail there on the beak. You can also see we have a darker tone there for the beak itself, but there even looks to be color variation in the beak. But as you lead up here in toward the face, you can see again another thing that's great about the paint job is we have a nice dark wash that's really tying all the coloration together, and you can see the dark wash also really quite nicely highlights the mouth of our Nasutoceratops. As you lead up from the kind of like slight yellowish brown tones of the face up toward the frill of our Nasutoceratops, you can see that the coloration lightens quite nicely. We have a kind of like an off-white or a light gray up here in the frill, and you can also see some orangish tones as well as some dark brown tones, and even within those dark brown tones looks like we might have some blacks kind of showing up there. And the dark wash also continues up here to highlight that detail perfectly when my camera decides to focus on it. There we go. And you can see all of the kind of spikes and stuff leading around the frill are all extremely nicely done when it comes to the paint work. And then as you lead up here, you can take a look at the opposing side of the face as well, and it looks great. As you lead up here toward the horns, I love how the horns start out with a really nice dark tone, and then they lighten as they lead out, very gradually, very naturally lighten toward the tips of the horns. And the actual detail of the horns, I would say, is just as impressive as everything else here on this Nasutoceratops. Man, this thing is honestly amazing. I would say this is probably the best Nasutoceratops that I have in my collection, or at the very least my favorite when it comes to both the sculpt and paint job. The eyes as well are very nicely painted. You can see a nice yellowish tone with a black pupil perfectly placed. It also sports a gloss coat for that nice bit of realism. As you lead back here, you can see the ears sculpted out. You can also see the nostrils sculpted out here toward the tip of the snout. As you lead back into the neck, you continue to see how nice and impressive looking that skin texture and scale detail is. Like, that is extremely vibrant scale detail, just gorgeous as a whole. You can also see all sorts of variation of color continuing as you lead back here, as you have kind of like bluish tones. You have brown, it looks like maybe there's some purple, there's like grays, there's like orange or red orange. Like, there is just a mountain of color through the course of this figure. And then there's also a nice smooth transition to a lighter tone on the underside. You can also see the throat is nicely sculpted out, and that dark wash follows through the entire figure, which looks great. You can also see kind of like some muscle definition right there in the neck region of the Nasutoceratops. You can see the rear of the frill also looks great when it comes to both the sculpt and paint. Again, that nice dark wash really showing off how good that scale detail looks on the back of the neck. As you lead along the back of the dinosaur, you can see kind of like a row of scoots moving down the spinal column. You can also see again all the really nice looking skin detail that is found on this figure. We also have osteoderms kind of poking up here and there through the course of the figure as you look at it. You'll notice them popping up, especially here in the stomach region. We also again have this nice little area of a plethora of coloration leading from the shoulder area up over through the shoulder and then into the thigh of the dinosaur. And again, it is incredibly nicely applied, like super nice, super natural looking, extremely smooth application of the paint, and just again, tons and tons and tons of color variation. As you lead down the front leg, you can see again that the detailing looks great. We've got the elbow sculpted out back there. Really nice pose for the front leg as the dinosaur's taking a step. You can see the toes are leaving the ground as it's about to take a step forward. Nice creasing in the joint of the elbow. Nice creasing in the wrist as well. You've got the toenails painted very nicely with a light tone, and they're also given a nice gloss coat. And it all looks really good. And again, the coloration, you can see all kinds of variation of color moving down the course of the front leg. As you lead back into the stomach region, you can see some skin wrinkling right here behind the leg, as again it's taking a step. It's kind of wrinkling the skin there. You can also see it pushing the skin here of the stomach. Actually, just in general, the girth in the stomach region is kind of being pushed because of the leg here taking a step forward. The knee is kind of pushing into the stomach, and it's definitely a pretty well-fed Nasutoceratops. Really does have a little bit of chunkiness to it. As you lead up here, you can see the hip bone is protruding from the skin. We have some more osteoderms and stuff leading over the top. Again, just an insane amount of coloration as you move down through the course of the thigh right there. You've got the kneecap sculpted out, nice calf muscle, nice creasing there in the joint of the leg, again showing off the walking motion. And just look at how crisp that sculpt is. That is just some of the nicest detailing I think I've ever seen. And then you've got a really nice foot sculpt down here. Again, it lightens to a nice bluish tone as you lead down into the foot sculpt. And then as you lead back up, you've got some more wrinkling and creasing leading along the back of the thigh, even out here into the tail where the thigh connects to the tail. And then you lead out the length of the tail and you have a really nice curve to the tail. Again, a few more areas of extra coloration leading out, and then it kind of polishes the figure off with a dark tip to the tail. As you look here at the underside, you can see more really nice looking sculpt, more nice paint. We do have a cloaca. We also have an orangish kind of a tone there around the cloaca to sort of differentiate it from the rest of the body. And we have a very different style of scaling here for the underside of the figure as well. And the dark wash seems to be present down here, but not quite as intense as we see it through the rest of the body, making sure that the underside looks nice and light, again, as far as the tones of color go. And as far as what we see on this side, you can see the Nasutoceratops has its head turned slightly to its left, so you can see a little bit of wrinkling and creasing there in the neck region of the dinosaur. But as we move back here, you can see that the only big difference you're going to see on this side is the positioning of the legs. You can see the legs are spread further apart, obviously showing the walking movement of the dinosaur. You can see how these toes are about to hit the ground as those toes are picking up off of the ground. So they've really captured that moment of the dinosaur walking and pretty much just froze it in time here for this model really nicely. As you look through, you can see more wrinkling and creasing here in the stomach region as far as the movement, being shown the dinosaur walking along and just how the skin is reacting to the dinosaur walking along. And the paintwork is incredible yet again as you move through the course of the body. It is just about as naturalistic and as impressive of a paint job I've ever seen, I think, on a factory-produced figure. And then again, you can see how this leg is trailing. This foot is nicely planted at this point in time, and then you lead out into the tail again. Man, that is absolutely amazing. This is far and away my new favorite Nasutoceratops. The only thing I will say that's a little bit interesting is the positioning of the horns looks slightly different from what I often see portrayed on Nasutoceratops. So it's an interesting take on the part of Haolonggood to kind of switch it up a little bit, but it is absolutely a phenomenal looking Nasutoceratops. They really took this one and just knocked it straight out of the park. And then we've also got the alternate color variant. Now this one, again, has lots of color here in the face. You can see all sorts of variations of greens, oranges, off-whites, variations of browns and stuff here in the face. And yet again, a nice dark wash to highlight all of the detail perfectly. We can see a dark tone for the beak yet again. Similar in style to what we had seen as far as the coloration of the horns as we start out with a darker tone, and you can see variations of browns here in the horns as we again have darker and lighter shades of browns as it moves toward the tips of the horns. Super smooth transitions leading out, and again, just expertly painted for sure. And then as you lead up into the frill, this one has some really nice, really flashy coloration up in the frill as we have these gorgeous greens and kind of like light yellowish greens, and like it is just one of the most colorful and one of the most visually appealing frills I think I've ever seen on a ceratopsian. That is just extremely impressive paintwork, and that's the one area that really drew me to this one immediately when I had seen the promotional images, was how nice the coloration of the frill looked on this one. And that's not to downplay the rest of the body, because I think it all looks great, but that frill is just one of the coolest looking visuals for a frill of a ceratopsian that I've ever seen. You again have the, spikes leading around the frill painted very nicely. As you lead back into the body, we do transition to kind of a bluish tone. And then rather than having just tons and tons of coloration like we had seen on the previous one, we mostly just have that kind of bluish tone, but you see we have some black that kind of leads down in stripes and designs through the course of the body as you move through. You can see kind of like a striping effect moving along the top of the dinosaur. So we have a little bit of a less flashy body for this one, but a very flashy frill for sure. And you can also see an extremely smooth transition as we lead down to that lighter tone. The lighter tone kind of overtakes a good bit there of the stomach region. And on top of the lighter tone, we actually have a little variation of color as we have like some orangish browns kind of popping up here and there. Again, you can see as we move back here, you have more of that black kind of designing down, really smooth transition to that lighter tone, leading into the back of the thigh. And then as you lead down into the foot, you can see there's like a really nice light wash, kind of like a white wash or a creamy color of some sort. And that kind of happens on all of the feet. You can see that light wash showing up. And I'm a big fan of that because I see companies often using light washes on their figures, and I always think that looks great as well. And then you can see the nails again look really nice as far as the paintwork goes. Different tone of color compared to the first version of the Nasutoceratops we had taken a look at. And again, the same sculpt as the other one, so you're going to see that same curve to the tail, and you can see more of that designing as you lead out. And then we also have some lighter tones here for the underside. I actually really quite like the coloration here of the underside because you can see quite a bit going on as far as the tones of color down here, like some light oranges and kind of like yellowish browns and stuff. I even see like some hints of greens showing up here on the underside of this Nasutoceratops. So they really did a very good job as far as choosing the colors for these figures. And of course, you're going to see pretty much the same thing over here. We also again have yellow eyes with a black pupil, really nicely placed yet again. And again, the same style of coloration and paintwork through the course of the figure with the blues, the blacks, that nice light wash and everything down here on the lower part of the feet. I think maybe like a light brownish wash could have really helped the figure a little bit just to kind of highlight the detail, but even still, again, I think they did a great job as far as the coloration and as far as the paint scheme chosen for this one. And again, one of the coolest looking frills I've ever seen on a ceratopsian right there. So, two killer Nasutoceratops from Haolonggood. Now, I knew these Nasutoceratops, being Nasutoceratops, were going to be a little on the smaller side as far as a figure goes, but they're actually a bit larger, I think, than I was expecting them to be, which was a nice surprise. For a length, you are looking at about 6.5 inches, or around 16.5 centimeters, and then for a height, the highest point would probably be the horn, just shy of 3 inches, or right around, or maybe a hair under 7.5 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line next to our Nasutoceratops from Haolonggood. And you can see they are both pretty much the size range you would expect, maybe a little bit larger, honestly, than I was expecting, like I had said a moment ago. I would honestly say they're probably like the perfect size for a Nasutoceratops figure. And then when it comes to a ceratopsian comparison, we have the Schleichdiabloceratops here next to the Nasutoceratops, and you can see that they're fairly similar in size, like I would say actually right there in pretty much the same size range. So if you do have the Schleichdiabloceratops, you're going to have a pretty good idea of the size of these Haolonggood Nasutoceratops, although the Haolonggood Nasutoceratops definitely has a bit more girth to the body, looks a lot healthier than the Schleich version of the Diabloceratops. Then for a random Haolonggood comparison, we have their Dicraeosaurus here next to the Nasutoceratops to give you a pretty good idea of the size between these two if you happen to have the Dicraeosaurus. We've also got the Haolonggood Quetzalcoatlus here next to the Nasutoceratops, just for yet again another Haolonggood comparison. But for another comparison, there is the Takaratomi Nasutoceratops next to the Haolonggood version. So if you do happen to have the Takaratomi version of a Nasutoceratops, then this might help to give you an idea of the size as well. And for one final comparison, we have a Mattel Dilophosaurus and Velociraptor here next to the Nasutoceratops, just to iron out one final comparison. I really wanted to compare them with the Safari Ltd Nasutoceratops because I feel like they'd probably be similar in size, but unfortunately I'm currently in the process of kind of redoing my Safari Ltd shelf, and everything is kind of like buried currently in a storage bin, so getting a hold of that figure at this point in time definitely not going to happen, but hopefully I gave you a few comparisons with at least one or two figures you may have had to give you an idea of the fact that these are, even though they're, of course smaller, still quite nicely sized as a whole. So these brand new Haolonggood Nasutoceratops are two of the absolute nicest ceratopsian figures that I've ever seen in my life. And in fact, the paint job of this one here is probably the nicest paint job, definitely one of the nicest paint jobs for sure, that I've ever seen on a factory-produced, mass-produced ceratopsian figure. Like, that paint job is out of this world. The sculpt, of course, is great on each of these figures. It really has an extremely highly detailed, extremely impressive sculpt. Nice naturalistic walking pose for the figure. Nothing over the top, nothing too incredible. Just a nice peaceful scene of a Nasutoceratops walking along. But the paint job of this one, again, is easily my favorite of the two, and definitely one of my favorite paint jobs that I've ever seen on a dinosaur figure. I absolutely love the coloration that they've chosen for this. I love how nice and natural the application of the paint is, how many different tones of color they've given this just to make it look as lifelike and realistic and as high quality as possible. And then the dark wash tying everything together is pretty much the icing on the cake. And then you also have this version, which contains one of the absolute most incredible looking frills I've ever seen on a ceratopsian when it comes to the tones of color chosen. They just did such a great job of making the entire head of this Nasutoceratops so flashy and so appealing. It's, times like this where you get companies that produce two different paint variants of their releases that The paint variants are just so good. Each and every one of them are just so good, like it's impossible to choose one over the other. You just have to get both. That's just the way it works, or at least for me anyway. So again, same deal with this one. That coloration is incredible, and I really do quite like the tones of color through the rest of the body as well, because I feel like it looks nice and natural. Kind of gives this one sort of like a male kind of appearance and the other one a female, because this one has kind of like a darker body color for the majority of the body, but then when you get to that head, it's just so vibrant and so appealing. And again, the fact that we kind of have them given an appearance here where they look like a male and female is just super, super cool. So as a whole, absolutely a massive recommendation from me. Two of my new favorite figures in my collection. So if you are interested in picking these up, I will include links in the description to where I purchased mine from Lana Time Shop. So make sure you check those links. Go grab these absolutely gorgeous Nasutoceratops and like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.